Well, we're going to read about just one member of the underclass here. And the first chapter kind of introduces what's going on. And there's a little bit of a basis for what's happened to him and, and, and why he can do certain things at night. Except for the taped ribs under his right arm, Nathan McKee sat completely naked on the foot of the bed in his drab room at the Hotel Rio, in the heart of San Francisco's Tenderloin. Tiny beads of sweat popped out on his skinny, pale body, forehead, and upper lip as he waited with a rising sense of nervous anticipation, wondering if the altered state would hit him again this evening, able to walk about unseen just like the last two nights. For Nathan, it was a rare, emotional, and infrequent introspective state of mind, because he hadn't felt or reflected about much of anything important since the accident near Kezar Stadium following a Christmas fundraising event 8 years ago. At the party, he'd argued with his wife Jerry, insisted on driving even though he had consumed too many drinks. Moments later, with a heart-stopping crunch, he'd slammed their BMW broadslide into a Lexus SUV after running a red light at Lincoln and Stanton. Miraculously, Nathan and the three occupants of the SUV survived the horrific crash with only a few minor scratches. But Jerry hadn't been so fortunate, dying of cerebral hemorrhaging from severe head trauma 15 minutes after arriving at the hospital. For most of the last decade, Nathan had aimlessly wandered the Tenderloin of San Francisco in a guilt-numbed daze. His sensibilities, usually heavy and anesthetized by liberal doses of Old English, Gallo Tokay, and Wild Irish Rose. Once he'd been hard Sergeant Taylor's suit on Montgomery Street in the financial district, a well-paid and highly respected market analyst at M.T. Bork and Associates. But he had squandered everything after the fatal accident, lucky now to even own a threadbare, greasy, khaki topcoat. And if it weren't for his monthly SSI checks, he would be sleeping in a cardboard tent in an alley somewhere in the loin, exposed to the bitter elements. As it was, Nathan always found himself panhandling at the end of each month, just to make ends meet. An older member of the Legion of the Lost and Forgotten, shuffling about anonymously in the Tenderloin. But he had been booze-free for the entire last week, ever since he had been badly beaten up and experienced a grand mal seizure over on O'Farrell Street near Homeboy's liquor store last Saturday night. The severe ass-kicking resulted in a heavily medicated 4-day stay in San Francisco General Hospital. Yes, he thought, inexplicably, still clean and sober after being back on the street unsupervised for 3 days. In-fucking-credible. Nathan waited, relishing his accelerated pulse rate, the heavily adrenaline-rushed, and especially his heightened sensibility. He gazed with interest for a moment out his 6-story wide-open window that faced westerly over Jones Street, watching the sun beginning to drop out of sight behind the buildings along Van Ness Hill, streaking the clouded sky with neon oranges, pinks, and violets. What was the old rhyme, he asked himself? Red skies at night, a sailor's delight? Something like that, anyhow. Of course, he hadn't consciously experienced or cared about such a thing as a beautiful sunset in a very long time. A gust of fresh air blew in the window, cooling Nathan's clammy skin. He nodded and sucked in a deep breath, nervously rubbing the backs of both of his hands, which were really tingling and itching now, knowing he didn't have long to wait. As dusk quickly settled over the Tenderloin, Nathan again experienced the now familiar onset of the anticipated seizure. Exactly the last 2 nights, like the last 2 nights since being released early Wednesday morning from SF General. A sudden, painful tightening of the muscles in the pit of his stomach that doubled him over, followed immediately by a rapid increase in his heart rate. And a moment later, an apparently sudden 40-degree drop in body temperature that thoroughly chilled his pale body, making him clench his teeth and shiver. He groaned, stirring upright, but partially paralyzed now, his blood racing his breathing heavily labored. Still gasping, his vision began to tunnel, and a moment later, Nathan felt himself slipping off into that other mysterious place. This is in italics now. Disoriented, dizzy, nauseous, surroundings surreal, deep in a cold, dark tunnel, drawn toward a blinding light, but stopping suddenly. No, more like standing in the dark of an empty backstage in a theater peering into glaring floodlights. Frozen like a deer, caught in the headlights of an onrushing car. Abruptly, the stage curtain began to silently unfurl, dropping ever so slowly, gradually blocking out even the tiniest glimmer of light. Total blackness, like a starless night falling in on itself. Alone in the smothering, claustrophobic darkness, after a few minutes he felt the sensation of sinking and spinning in water as if he were being sucked down a huge black storm drain. Again he lost consciousness. Nathan awoke. This is italics over. Nathan awoke, still sitting completely nude in the same spot on the foot of his bed. In a few moments he had been unconscious. Night had begun to settle fully over the city, his room now cloaked in darkness. And through the open window he could clearly hear a nearby sign, screeching loudly like a scalded alley cat. Taking a quick personal inventory, he realized he felt pretty good. His breathing, vision, and pulse rate all seemed to be returning to normal. The backs of his hands were no longer itching, and his skin temperature had warmed up to almost normal now, too. But exactly like the last 2 nights, his usually deathly pale body and limbs had been radically recast during the seizure, taking on an inky 3D mottling. Even the fair blue birthmarks on the back of his hands had been affected, deepening to indigo, and all this producing a strange light-altering effect on his skin. Staring into the palm of his hand was like looking into a deep, black pool of water that sucked in all the light, reflecting nothing back. His hand and fingers made indistinct by the odd absorbing effect on light. Even close up, only a foot or so away from his face, his hand appeared fuzzy, and after slowly stretching his arm out, the hand and wrist disappeared completely, blending in perfectly with the room's increasing darkness. Nervously, Nathan flexed his lower legs and toes and fingered the clear tape just under his right armpit that still tightly bound the 2 cracked ribs. Then, after a dry shuffle, he concluded, "Guess I'm still in one piece." Of course it occurred to him at this moment, as it had the last 2 nights, to immediately return and see the doctors over at SF General about his skin alteration. But again, he considered the idea for only a fleeting moment and really rejected it. He shook his head emphatically. No way. Too much trouble getting into the hospital over there, and besides, over the years, Nathan had learned to accept whatever the Tenderloin dealt out to him with a kind of a fatalistic resignation with no complaining. Even something this unusual. Go with the flow, man. This was actually pretty exciting. Oh, yeah. He stood up, stumbling, his legs still drained of energy, causing him to reach out and catch the edge of the nearby nightstand in order to steady himself for a few seconds. He pressed his backside firmly against the wall. Still a little unstable on his feet, he took several deep breaths, letting the air trickle out slowly across his chapped lips. Feeling better, he stepped cautiously into the middle of the small room, pausing for a few seconds to admire his camouflaged presence in the cracked dresser mirror 2 strides away near the door. He couldn't help grinning with boyish glee at the lack of a normal reflection. Squared up directly now in front of the mirror, he saw an empty, unlit room with only a slight distortion of the dark atmosphere where he stood. The cool breeze through the open window seemed to be disturbing a wave of heat rising from a floor vent, except for the fact there was no vent in here in the center of the room, and no heat at all in any of the Hotel Rio rooms during this time of year. Of course, he speculated the last 2 nights about what might be causing this strange transformation, eventually setting on what he called the chameleon effect. He figured the 3D modeling of his skin was the result of mysterious biochemicals released during the weird seizure, affecting his skin cells, perhaps something like a pink flush after a fainting spell, but lingering much longer and having much more drastic effect. Dismissing the sketchy explanation of the remarkable transformation for the moment, Nathan chuckled nervously as he left the room, still fully unclothed. At the foot of the stairs leading into the dingy lobby of the hotel, Nathan paused and glanced left at Ferdy, who did not even look up through the barred window at the narrow front check-in counter. The skinny desk clerk with an ever-present cigarette dangling from his lip was busy squinting and laying out keys for the first four rooms. Most of these rented nightly for hourly rates. Rooms with unchanged sheets left warm and rumpled and sweaty by the end of the night. Tonight, Friday would be especially hectic. A constant stream of women or trannies and their customers coming in from the street, most using the rooms for 10 or 15 minutes at most. And Nathan wondered why Ferdy bothered with the keys at all. More than half of the door locks in the old rundown reel, especially those on the busy first floor, didn't even work. He shrugged and deftly dodged to the side, avoiding being run over by an eager couple hurrying in the open but narrow door of the hotel. The thin hooker led a fat, red-faced John to the front desk, where the gasping customer dug out and handed Ferdy a crumpled $5 bill, receiving a room key in return. Actually, the number keys did benefit the desk clerk in one way, helping Ferdy keep track of which rooms were in current use. Satisfied now that neither the couple nor Ferdy had seen him, Nathan turned away from the front desk. He stepped outside, shivering in the cool evening air, furtively glancing about and chuckling again to himself, but more confidently now. That's the first chapter.
Wow.